With 1 week left until the U.S. presidential election, the nominees make a final push for votes.
As I've said many times, a man you can bait with a tweet is not a man we can trust with nuclear weapons.
Hillary is not the victim. The American people are the victims of this corrupt system in every way.
We'll discuss the FBI's renewed investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails, the impact on the race, and international reaction. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. The lead for U.S. Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton is narrowing in the polls after the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation announced it's resuming its investigation into Clinton's private computer server. According to Real Clear Politics, which averages the results of most major polls, Clinton's lead over U.S. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump has dropped from 4.6 points to 2.2 points since Friday. And China is also weighing in on this. China is weighing in on what a Trump presidency could mean for global climate change. We begin our election coverage with CCTV's Nathan King. And Nathan, let's begin with those comments by China's top climate change negotiator, Xi Jinping. He's rejected a plan by Donald Trump to back out of that Paris Agreement. What do we know about that?
Well, exactly. Climate change hasn't come up much in this election campaign, even in the three debates. I don't think there was a single question about it. But a lot of countries really incredulous that Donald Trump would pull out of that hard-won agreement in Paris that the US and China spearheaded. And Xi Jinping really suggesting that the US stay its course. Let's take a listen.
If politicians resist this trend, I don't think they'll win the support of their people, and their country's economic and social progress will also be affected. So on this point, I believe a wise leader, especially a political leader, should take policy stances that follow global development trends. As long as they are a wise leader, I am confident they will do so.
Obviously, China and others do not interfere in the election, but they have made some comments. Remember, Donald Trump did actually call climate change a Chinese-invented hoax at one stage.
Now, Nathan, on Friday, the FBI announced it was renewing its investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server. How unusual is that, and how has it played out in this election?
And this is like a script from House of Cards or something. You remember a few months back, the FBI declined to charge Hillary Clinton over her use of a private email server, although they did say there was classified information involved, that she did not willfully mishandle it. And then suddenly they discovered on a computer belonging to her longtime aide, Huma Abedin, who was married or is estranged from Anthony Weiner, who is in trouble on his own over sexting, that there may be emails in there that they haven't looked at. So they're essentially having a look at that. But he issued this letter, the head of the FBI, to Congress saying this was happening because he said the case was closed. And this has reignited Donald Trump campaign saying, look, there's still more smoke there and potentially fire as well. And coming just a week before the election, quite incredible, actually unprecedented, Democrats up in arms. In fact, one senior senator saying the FBI broke the law by interfering in the election. House of Cards stuff indeed.
Right, the campaign itself, less than 7 days to go. How will the candidates be spending their time?
There's a sigh of relief going across America that it's only 7 days away or so. But yeah, you're absolutely right. They are barnstorming across the country, especially in the so-called battleground states. What are we talking about? Florida, Ohio, North Carolina. Also out west, we have Nevada, Colorado, Arizona. Now, the climb for Donald Trump here is very, very high indeed. He basically has to win all of them, including potentially Pennsylvania as well, which is largely Democratic. Hillary Clinton only has to win Florida or a couple more to basically win. But the polls are tightening, and Donald Trump is now spending money in normally Democratic states like Michigan with large working class populations. We'll see if he can make a dent, but the polls generally give Hillary Clinton an edge up to 4 or 5 points. But of course, as you know, in this race, anything can happen, and it usually does.
Thanks, Nathan. That's CCTV's Nathan King reporting. Well, let's get to our panel right now. Joining us in our Washington, D.C. studio is Mike Lillis. He's a senior reporter for the political newspaper The Hill. Also with us is Syed Arakat. He's the Washington Bureau Chief of Al-Quds Daily newspaper, and we're joined by Hilary Shelton. He serves as the Director of the Washington Bureau of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, better known, I guess, Hilary, by its acronym, the NAACP.
Absolutely.
Mike, let me start with you. You work for an important political newspaper. You're at the coalface, so to speak, of this election. 1 week out from the election, and as we heard Nathan tell us, the race is tightening again. But these are national polls, aren't they? And America doesn't really have a national election. It's a state-by-state contest. So are the polls really narrowing?
They're definitely narrowing, but you made an important distinction. All this focus on the national polls is a little bit misguided because, you know, a lot of these presidential elections are won by people who never even win the popular vote. Obama was one of the very few who has won the popular vote twice in a row. That's an anomaly. Going back to Bill Clinton, he didn't win the popular vote. So real clear politics, yes. Nationally, the polls are shifting, the polls are tightening, but you have to focus, as Nathan said, on the battleground states. What's happening in these places? Donald Trump's path to victory is already very narrow. We know the blue states, we know the red states, and it's the battleground states that these candidates are going to have to focus on, not just with polling, not just with money, but the barnstorming that we're going to see here in the last week.
That's something we hear very often. Who has a path to the White House? Hillary Clinton has many ways to get to the White House, depending on the number of states she can win. Donald Trump doesn't.
Donald Trump doesn't, that's right. You know, his base, you know, the red states are in the South. Yeah. They're in the Midwest. Clinton has the population bases on the coasts, and she has a commanding lead until at least Friday in most of these battleground states, in the Pennsylvanias, in the Michigans, in the Wisconsins, in the places that Nathan just mentioned. And if she can, it's yet to be seen what the damage is from this Comey decision, from this announcement. We won't know that until November 8th, November 9th. But heading into it, she's got something new to worry about. The campaign, by all signs, is still confident, but they do have something now that was an October surprise that they didn't bank on.
Hillary, what is your reading of the race at this stage? I mean, given Donald Trump's track record, given the statements he's made, racist statements, bigoted statements, his treatment of women, his lack of experience, are you surprised that he's got so far?
I am in too many ways, as a matter of fact, particularly on the women's side of the equation. I mean, certainly as I look at the African-American community, which our organization very heavily serves, African-Americans are overwhelmingly supportive of Hillary Clinton and overwhelmingly in opposition to Donald Trump, quite frankly. And as we look at much of the overlap, our friends in the Muslim communities and other racial and ethnic minority communities, of course the Latino communities are all very strongly opposed to Mr. Trump for so many things that he's had to say, and very strongly again supportive of Ms. Clinton. The biggest concern for us, however, is the obstacles that may occur as we move towards the polls. What we're very delighted to see is all the early voting that's going on. We believe that will help circumvent a lot of the challenges with long lines at the polls on Election Day. And quite frankly, we're actually urging NAACP representatives from throughout the United States to go to the polls now. If early voting is available to you, utilize it to make sure that there are no problems. If you get to the polls and find out there is one, you can hopefully fix it before the election and be able to cast that vote and have it counted. So I am surprised. I'm surprised he's gotten as far as he has. I'm surprised to see so many American women, particularly white women, coming out and supporting him for what seems to be almost antiquated reasons in a lot of ways. But it's fascinating to see all this happening right now.
Syed, what's your take on this? Given all that Hillary has just told us, why is this race so close then?
Well, you know, obviously that the polls were about to tighten up anyway. I mean, you know, this is the last week. You know, normally you have a big lead after the convention. There are elements, there were so many October surprises that really gave Hillary Clinton a push, so to speak, and then you have this thing. But I believe that it would have happened anyway, without even the Comey thing. Because, you know, until now, really, this Comey issue has not had time to incubate yet, or, you know, be reflected in the polls or people's sentiments and so on. So it was from the beginning that this race was going to be tight. There was some, you know, feeling that a great many Republicans will abandon the base, but they will come back at the end, and that is exactly what is happening.
Mike, what's your feeling on the email controversy? Do you think it's going to have a major effect, a significant effect on how voters cast their ballots next week?
Well, we don't know what the emails are going to reveal, if anything, before November 8th. Comey seems to think there might be something there. Whether or not there is, we just don't know.
And it's highly unlikely that we will know that by next Tuesday, would we?
Well, it depends on how many emails they got to dig through. I mean, his silence after the fact is something as remarkable as the announcement, I think, at this point, and which is why the Democrats are so up in arms. But what this does that's so damaging to Hillary Clinton is she's already not popular. Her disapproval rating is above 50% for both candidates. I mean, it's an unusual election in that sense to begin with. But she, for a long time, has had trust issues. There is a sense that the Clinton team, going back to Bill, is insular. It's this kind of closed box that nobody else has access to. They protect themselves. They treat their friends well, but they kind of shun everybody else. They're very secretive. They don't play by everybody's rules. You hear Trump say this every day from the stump. So this feeds into that damaging image, and it's going to hurt her in terms of trust of the voters. And to get people to the polls, you need them to trust you.
Hillary, the director of the FBI, James Comey, has been taking a lot of flack for sending this letter to Congress, for making this announcement last Friday. But if we look at this objectively, isn't this Hillary Clinton that brought this problem on herself by flouting the rules in the first place?
Well, I think you could certainly argue that, there's certainly the mistakes that were made and how she's handled her email accounts, utilizing her own personal server, are certainly things, as we look in hindsight, this should not have happened. However, the big concern for us is how this is really playing out in many ways. In essence, what we have is another distraction. It's extraordinary for the head of the FBI, our chief policing organization, so to speak, in the United States, would actually publicly talk about a case that is open now in the way he's discussing this case. And first saying, well, we took a look at it, and even then, as he talked about, we didn't find anything illegal in the emails that we found or how she's done it. We can argue that it was reckless. So then he goes from legal assessments then to editorial assessments of what's happened, which raises another very important issues for us. In essence, has he taken a position on this is coming through these editorial issues, which is certainly contradictory to what the head of any policing organization doing an investigation like this should be doing. But then to add other challenges, of course, is what's happened as they looked at Uma's information. And utilizing...
That's her assistant.
The assistant, exactly. Utilizing her server then as a tool to come back around to the first set of pieces of information that he gathered that keeps this issue alive and on the table.
Let me just throw this in. As Michael points out, we don't really know what's on these emails. We don't know what's going to happen. But suppose there's something incriminating in these emails. Did the director really have a choice? Because what if she won the election and this came out afterwards?
No. Yeah, you know what? That's what they say. They say that there could have been something there. But you know, we have in this country, we have a system. We call it, you know, Congress and impeachment and so on. If there's, you know, such a that requires such a thing. So it is very difficult. I know. I mean, we would like to be very objective, and as objective as one can be, it's very difficult to take the politics out of it because look at the timing. I mean, this is really literally throwing a monkey wrench, or as some describe, a hand grenade into this whole election thing. It could have waited. So we'll see. I mean, you know, ultimately it will be, you know, this thing either, you know, sort of looked at or analyzed through the media, through the political system, and we will find out. All the markings are very political.
Donald Trump, of course, has taken full advantage of this in the last week of the election. Let's take a listen to some of what he said. Let's watch.
Hillary is the one who sent and received classified information on an insecure server, putting the safety of the American people under threat. That's what she did. $650,000. You know what I call that? That's the mother lode. Hillary is not the victim. The American people are the victims of this corrupt system in every way. And this is your one chance right now, November 8th, to change it.
So Hillary, isn't Donald Trump doing here the point that Michael just mentioned, that there is this public perception of Hillary being dishonest?
Absolutely.
Not playing by the rules. Well, and this is feeding into that.
Absolutely. And anytime you have a live investigation going on through this process, as you could, it's what we could find, what we might find, but it's not what we have found. But as we know, so oftentimes in our country, unfortunately, if somebody's being investigated, there is a presumption of guilt. And I think that's what Mr. Trump is playing on right now, the presumption that because she is being investigated, that she must be guilty. And because the first investigation ended, with the conclusions that Mr. Comey shared. But now this new investigation coming right back around says, no, she's still being investigated. And so Donald Trump can make up whatever he wants to make up in terms of what he believes might be in there and let the Americans' imagination run wild. I mean, that's what we're seeing now.
Can you imagine how complex this is for a foreign audience?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Michael, having said that, let's move on to something else that's also making news this election, and that is Vladimir Putin and Russia. The Russian president seems to have reluctantly been pulled front and center into this election. He's been accused of all kinds of things, of hacking Democratic Party servers, of interfering in the election, of trying to influence the outcome of the election. We've seen no proof of this, but why is Russia suddenly at the center of this?
Well, you say reluctant, but I don't know how reluctant it is. If you ask the Democrats, they think it's a very I think this is a very strategic move on his part to get Hillary Clinton out of the White House. Right. The reason the connection has been made is because the administration has said there's this connection. They said that the DNC emails that were hacked over the summer, the Democratic National Committee emails that were hacked over the summer, have been linked to the Russian government. They think that this is a branch of that, these latest hacks.
So why don't they later? That's such an important thing that you're talking about there, because you're making an accusation against another government. Why doesn't the White House lay it out for us and say, this is the evidence we found, here it is, this links it directly to Russia?
Well, I think if they had that proof, I'm not sure how they got it, for one thing. I'm not a computer scientist, so I don't know all the details about how they've found out these things. Right. It might expose them for counter spying type of operations, and maybe they don't want to expose themselves to that. But the short answer, become a political issue. Nathan said this is House of Cards. It sounds more like a Tom Clancy novel at this point, right, with all these, with Russia getting involved. What you're seeing politically on Capitol Hill is Democrats saying because of Russia's involvement, we shouldn't be using any of these things on the campaign trail. Republicans are ignoring that for the most part. Senator Marco Rubio was an exception to that. He said, this is crazy what's happening, and I'm not going to use anything that leaks out of this because we don't want foreign governments to in effect, sway the outcome of our sovereign elections. He has been a voice in the wilderness on the Republican side, and Trump is running away with it. In terms of the details of how or why or we know these things, meaning the Obama administration, again, I'm not privy to those details because I'm not in their offices. But, right. But it is a fascinating thing to watch and unprecedented in my time covering this stuff.
Hillary, President Putin himself has responded to these allegations. Let's listen to some of what he said.
Does anyone seriously think that Russia can in some way influence the choice of the American people? Is America some kind of banana republic? America is a great country. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So there was a piece in the Washington Post today in which the reporter quoted some of the agents at the FBI who said that, yes, there's a lot of evidence around, a lot of it's circumstantial, but we really don't have anything concrete to point to Russia. So is this some kind of distraction, an election time distraction?
I think in many ways it is, but it's also being utilized as a tool. I mean, here you have a country that the U.S. has very little trust for, and the American people, of course, through mediated images, have very little trust for as well. And as such, now we're saying this is the boogeyman that has the technology that could very well do something along these lines. We want to associate him with Donald Trump, and then we hear a lot of the murmuring from all sides. One side saying this is Donald Trump's way of opening a door by saying nice things about Mr. Putin to perhaps do business with him in the future. Opening doors, so it becomes. And they're also saying with the signals that Donald Trump has sent more publicly that to Mr. Putin, even over our television lines, is that very well Mr. Putin could very well have his technology experts tap into the emails of others that are running for the election and so forth. So it raises a little bit more suspense. Yeah. So it becomes more like a cloak and dagger novel in an awful lot of ways, with technology playing in. And of course, Mr. Putin had a great time talking about the U.S. in terms of banana republics and other issues and so forth. Sure, for him, this has been great sport, to say the least.
Said, we've had guests in the studio here on the show who've told us things like, well, look, you could never tell where these hacks took place from because nowadays it's so easy to mask the origins of these things. You could send it all around the world and it could get back to you. The other thing we've heard is Putin is not that stupid to want Donald Trump in the White House.
No, definitely Putin is not stupid.
Yeah.
There is a great deal of tension between the United States and Russia certainly over the past 3 years, over Ukraine, over Syria, over many places. There is, at one point, the President of the United States called Russia a regional power that does not make anything. So there's a great deal of bad feeling, within the Russian presidency and the Kremlin, towards, or animosity maybe, towards the Obama administration and towards Hillary Clinton, that they see as an extension of the Obama administration and someone who's going to go on with the policies of enmity, so to speak, towards Russia. But that said, I think that the Russia role is really exaggerated.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good to have someone who is really out there evil, and it's almost a throwback to the evil empire by Reagan. So and that is good politics, but I don't think that it is wise, because whoever is elected president must work with Russia. I mean, we have a lot of common interest in the world, in Syria, in Iraq, in many other places. You need to work with them. You don't need this kind of gulf. I mean, it's definitely Mr. Putin might like what Trump says about NATO, and there's no need for it, and so on, and why are we spending all this money and having finance and all these things, but definitely this harping on Putin and Russia and sort of injecting him in the debates, and all these things, and Mrs. Clinton, Hillary Clinton, calling Trump maybe a puppet of Putin and so on. Maybe it's good for the moment, it's good zingers, but I think for the long term it's not good.
And it's a nice good guy, bad guy scenario, isn't it? Nathan, about the last few days going into the election, what are your feelings? What will these two candidates be doing in the next few days?
Well, what we're going to see is those battleground states that we've been talking about, they've got to get there. Nathan mentioned that Trump's going to go to Michigan. He thinks he has a shot there now. Of course, that was a state that went heavy for Bernie Sanders in the primary. So it is a white working class vote that Trump thinks he can steal from Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. Very unusual in a presidential race, but that's the dynamics we have. They're just going to go all out. They'll probably sleep an hour and a half a night, yeah. But they're going to be on the stump trying to get these people out. And everything right now is turnout. Something like the Comey announcement happens, and it's not like Hillary Clinton supporters are suddenly going to say, I can't vote for her, I got to go to vote for Donald Trump. It's more like Republicans who have been alienated by Trump might suddenly say, I can't trust her, we got to keep her out. And that's the big fear of the Democrats.
So you're saying a higher turnout means that's better for Trump?
Higher turnout of Republicans who would have stayed home otherwise. And that's up and down the ballot. A lot of talk of what's going to happen down the ballot. What is the Trump effect on a lot of vulnerable Republicans in both the Senate and the House? The Senate is right on the edge. The Republicans have the majority right now, but it's perilous, and it could easily flip. And that's going to depend on turnout. The House is safer in the Republican side, but the Democrats are looking to make big gains. 15, 20-seat gains would be a good night for them. Turnout is going to dictate whether they get there or not.
Hillary, when we talk about the election, we talk about candidates building coalitions. Coalitions that involve different groups, African Americans, Latinos, women, professional men, etc., things like that. Let's look at the African American vote. There, as you pointed out, there's very strong support for Hillary Clinton. Yet you have some African American leaders, some activists like Michelle Alexander, who points out that this support is misplaced, that Hillary Clinton has not been good for African Americans. They point to mass incarceration, the fact that her husband, Bill Clinton, was president when those laws were passed that put many, many African Americans in prison. So how do you explain the support for her?
Well, I think what they're talking about is something that is very important. Of course, our criminal justice system, very specifically. As you think about Michelle Alexander, her book, of course, The New Jim Crow, and issues along those lines are very important to look at. And she's right. A lot of challenges happened during that period, and Clinton, of course, did sign many of the criminal justice bills, particularly around drug usage and crime and violence and everything was going on during his term. There's no question about that as well. But I think most people look at what's going forward. Bill Clinton was also a big favorite among African Americans, even during the time of his administration and afterwards. Many learned of those problems, but also saw Bill Clinton come out and not only apologize, but say that what we did then was a bad idea. As a matter of fact, just last year, Bill Clinton came to the NAACP National Convention just one day after Barack Obama had been there. Obama had come to talk about some of those same criminal justice issues and how his administration would work towards a massive overhaul of our criminal justice system, something, again, African Americans have been asking for some time. But the fascinating thing was what happened the next day with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton came out and first said two things. He said, number one, I'm really glad you had President Obama here. I agree with everything he said and everything he's trying to do. It needs to happen. We made some terrible mistakes during the time I was President of the United States. We received incorrect information and rushed to judgment on so many things that we need to do differently. I support Barack Obama as he moves to make these changes. I think African Americans look at mea culpas along the same lines. If you're willing to admit that you did something wrong and begin talking about strategies to correct it, we're with you, we appreciate it, we're all human, we'll see what happens. And all those things seem to be moving in the right direction. Then the African American community is also looking at the policy positions that Ms. Clinton is raising that are important to us today. Right. Whether it's education, criminal justice, employment, health care, and other issues that are strategically important to the African American community and the role of government.
All right, Syed, I want to look at one other group. Those are Muslim voters in the United States. We've had all this vitriol come out from Donald Trump about wanting to stop Muslims coming into the country, about increasing surveillance of Muslims who live in this country. Now, Muslims, according to Pew Research, make up 1 to 2% of the U.S. population. But they live in important states, swing states like Ohio, Virginia, Florida. So how important is the Muslim vote going to be?
Very important, very important. And look, during the 2000 election, for instance, they voted for George Bush. They voted for George W. Bush. And, you know, then a couple of years later, 3 years later, he invaded Iraq. You know, so ever since the Muslim vote has really migrated to the Democratic Party. And now they are galvanized because they are scared. I mean, listening to the rhetoric coming out of Mr. Trump, you know, all throughout. In fact, the Republican, even mainstream Republican candidates and so on during the primaries, it scares them. So I believe that they will come out in force. They will vote for Hillary Clinton. You know, they may not like Hillary Clinton. She may not be very popular because they do espouse great many conservative values. I mean, you know, Muslim Americans, you know, they're family oriented. They espouse some or many of the Republican kind of values and so on, but they will vote Democratic. In my opinion, those are what the surveys are showing, and they're out there in force. They're organizing for them in these battleground states, especially in Florida, in Michigan, in Ohio, and many other places. And I think they will come out in force. And I think their vote will make a difference.
Okay, and that's where we are going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arund Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.